On April 10th, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump announced a major move for the global economy. The U.S. decided to increase tariffs on imported goods from China to 125%, sparking a wave of reactions from economists and other countries. This is part of the U.S. trade strategy to increase pressure on China in trade negotiations, especially when the world's two largest economies are facing a fierce trade war. On April 10th, 2025, an important decision was made by U.S. President Donald Trump. The U.S. government decided to impose a new tax rate of up to 125% on imported goods from China, a move that has shocked not only the U.S. business community, but also global markets. This decision has once again made the global economy pay attention. The United States and China, the two largest economic powers in the world, have had a tense trade relationship for many years. However, President Trump's latest move has taken this tension to a new level, when the tariff rate on Chinese goods was applied at a record high of up to 125%. Over the past 2 years, the U.S. has applied many tariff measures on Chinese goods to reduce the trade deficit and protect domestic industries. However, with this decision, President Trump wants to send a strong message to China that the U.S. will no longer accept unfair trade practices. The main issue that President Trump and the U.S. administration are targeting is the trade imbalance between the two countries, when China exports more than it imports from the U.S. This not only reduces the competitiveness of U.S. companies, but also affects the global economy, as the U.S. faces increasing pressure from its own allies. The Trump administration believes that imposing high tariffs on Chinese products will force Beijing to change its trade policy and improve issues such as intellectual property rights and regulations that protect China's domestic industry, factors that the U.S. considers unfair. However, while U.S. leaders may see this as a step in the right direction, many analysts say that this decision could lead to serious consequences for the global economy. Trade sanctions could push both countries into a full-blown trade war, affecting global supply chains and raising costs for consumers on both sides. While U.S. businesses, especially technology companies, may benefit from reducing their reliance on China, in the short term they will also face higher production costs and will have to look for alternative markets to maintain profits. It is worth noting that this decision is not just China that will be affected. Other countries, especially U.S. trading partners, could also be indirectly affected by this tariff war. Economists warn that a full-blown tariff war could cause instability in financial markets, push up inflation, and affect global economic growth. The decision to increase tariffs to 125% on Chinese goods is not simply a tariff measure, but part of President Trump's long-term strategy to protect American industries, especially manufacturing and technology. However, this change will have far-reaching impacts on many areas, from domestic production to global supply chains. China, as one of the world's largest manufacturers, especially in the fields of technology and electronics, will be strongly affected by this decision. Typical products such as smartphones, computer components, and home appliances from China will have higher prices when they arrive in the U.S. This means that the selling price of Chinese products in the U.S. will increase, causing American consumers to pay more for products that are already very popular. In particular, electronic products such as phones, laptops, and other electronic devices will be directly affected. For U.S. companies, especially those that rely on raw materials and components from China, the tariff increase will increase production costs, directly affecting profits. Some companies, especially large technology companies such as Apple, Qualcomm, and Intel, may face difficulties in maintaining competitive prices. Apple, for example, has many products manufactured in China, from microprocessors to electronic components. This tariff increase could lead to increased prices for iPhones, MacBooks, and other products, which could reduce Apple's competitiveness in the market. Not only U.S. companies, but also global businesses will face challenges when they are dependent on raw materials and components from China. Automakers, technology companies, and other manufacturing industries may have to find ways to adjust their supply chains to avoid these negative impacts. Some companies will have to find alternative sources of supply in countries other than China, which could increase costs and disrupt global supply chains. Manufacturers may have to move production outside of China to avoid tariffs, but this will increase production costs, While some businesses may be able to find alternative partners in other countries, some industries, such as technology and automotive, may have difficulty finding supplies of equivalent quality without increasing production costs. This also means that consumers will ultimately have to bear the increased costs, affecting the budgets of American families. This change will not only affect companies, but also directly affect the daily lives of millions of consumers. Increasing tariffs on China is not just a trade strategy, but a decision with far-reaching implications for both the U.S. and global economies. While American companies can protect their interests, consumers in other countries face new difficulties. Immediately after President Trump's decision was announced, countries and international organizations quickly expressed their views. The European Union, Japan, and many other countries reacted strongly, concerned about the negative impact of imposing high tariffs on Chinese goods. The European Union, one of the largest trading partners of the United States, immediately criticized this move. EU officials said that the increase in tariffs could lead to an escalation in the global trade war, harming the recovery of the global economy after the pandemic. Europe has announced plans to retaliate with tariffs on U.S. goods. The European Union announced that it would impose tariffs on U.S. products, including agricultural products, technological equipment, and automobiles, to protect its interests and maintain a fair trade balance. In particular, U.S. agricultural products will be heavily affected, with tariffs ranging from 15% to 25%. This is a big blow to U.S. agriculture, which depends on exports to the EU market. Japan, for its part, has also not hesitated to criticize the U.S. decision. Japan is concerned that increasing tariffs on China will disrupt the region's supply chain, directly affecting manufacturing industries in Japan, especially the auto and electronics industries. Japan believes that a tariff war between the U.S. and China will increase the production costs of Japanese companies in other countries, making it difficult for them to maintain profits. Japan also warns that escalating trade tensions could lead to a global recession. Southeast Asian countries, which are important trading partners of the U.S. and China, are also starting to feel the impact of this decision. Vietnam, Thailand, and Malaysia, countries with close trade relations with China, are concerned that businesses will move production to other countries to avoid tariffs. In fact, Southeast Asian countries are facing a difficult choice. They can benefit from companies shifting production to their countries, but they can also face negative impacts from disruptions to global supply chains. While countries deal with the immediate effects of this tariff increase, the big question remains: can the U.S. and China find common ground, or will the world face a more comprehensive trade war? This will not only affect the two countries, but also have far-reaching implications for the global economy. One thing is certain: this decision will continue to escalate tensions and create profound changes in the way countries build trade relationships in the future. The U.S. decision to increase tariffs on Chinese goods not only affects the countries directly involved, but also creates major fluctuations in the global economy. From major economies such as Europe, Japan, to emerging economies, all feel the pressure from this tariff war. In the financial market, stock indexes have immediately begun to react to this news. Wall Street has seen strong growth as investors hope that reducing the trade deficit will help the U.S. economy grow strongly. However, this has caused panic in international markets as investors worry about the negative impact on the supply chain and the global economy. While the U.S. market has seen some short-term benefits, international markets have faced negative impacts. Analysts fear the move could slow the economic recovery from the pandemic, especially as major economies like the European Union and China are each other's major trading partners. For exporting countries, especially those that rely on exports to China and the United States, the tariffs could reduce purchasing power and disrupt global supply chains. Manufacturers in countries like Mexico, Vietnam, and India could face difficulties as companies shift production to lower-cost locations. Developing countries could see their growth hampered. While they may benefit from companies shifting production, uncertainty in global supply chains and higher tariffs will increase input costs and reduce competitiveness. In the long run, countries will face a difficult problem of how to maintain stability in international trade when tariffs are imposed unexpectedly. This may force businesses to restructure supply chains and seek alternative markets, causing major disruptions in industries. As soon as the news of the tariff increase was announced, China reacted quickly and strongly. The Chinese government convened emergency meetings to assess the situation and find a way to deal with the U.S. decision. China is not a country that can be easily bullied in trade wars. As the world's second-largest economy, China has some important levers to fight back, especially in the export sector and the global supply chain. China has announced retaliatory measures with higher tariffs on some U.S. exports, especially agricultural products, automobiles, and technology products. These products account for a large proportion of U.S. exports to China. China has imposed tariffs on U.S. agricultural products, especially soybeans and beef, which account for the majority of U.S. exports to China. In addition, U.S. cars are also heavily taxed, directly harming major U.S. automakers such as Ford, GM, and Tesla. In particular, China can also use informal measures, such as restricting access to financial markets and reducing the ability to participate in major projects led by U.S. companies. These are levers that China can use to put pressure on the U.S. economy. China can also impose restrictions on investment in U.S. technology companies, especially those in the semiconductor and artificial intelligence industries. These companies may have difficulty developing markets in China, which is a large consumer market and an important manufacturing hub. China can also use diplomatic strategies to increase pressure on the U.S., calling on other countries in the region and around the world to participate in multilateral trade negotiations in order to minimize the impact of this tariff war. With China forging trade agreements with other countries, it can cushion the impact of U.S. tariffs. China can also use other markets to export its products and find alternative partners. China is clearly not an easy opponent to ignore in this trade war. Even if the U.S. increases tariffs, China will not sit still and will use all the levers at its disposal to protect its economic interests. This trade war will continue to escalate, and it will not be easy to find a truce. Will China be able to maintain stability in its economy under pressure from the U.S.? Or will there be bigger changes in its global trade strategy? We will continue to monitor and update the next developments. The trade war between the U.S. and China will certainly have long-term impacts on the global economy. However, the important thing is how the two countries will find a way to resolve these tensions without increasing instability in the world economy. Can the U.S. and China reach a fair trade agreement, or will this confrontation continue to erode cooperation and cause difficulties for the global economy? Only time will tell. We will continue to monitor and update the latest developments. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next important and interesting videos.